Mark expertly maneuvered the espresso machine, drawing out the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee that filled Stellar Brews. The comforting hiss and gurgle of the machine provided the familiar soundtrack to yet another monotonous morning in Millbrook. Population 12,453. At 40, Mark had mastered the art of the perfect pour-over, but his yearning for adventure still seemed out of reach. "One vanilla latte for Maria," he called out, sliding the cup across the counter. Maria, a regular with permanently frazzled eyes, barely looked up from her phone as she grabbed the cup and hurried out. Mark sighed, wiping the counter for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The clock ticked 10:17 a.m., with another long 8 hours ahead of him. Just then, the bell above the door chimed, interrupting his thoughts. Mark glanced up, his usual greeting ready, but the words died on his lips as he saw who had entered. Two identical women stood at the counter, their appearance strikingly odd. Pale, flawless skin, impossibly large, glowing eyes, and hair that shifted between blue and purple depending on the light. "Greetings, Earth Dweller," one of them chirped with a wide smile. "We require your finest bean juice concoction." Mark blinked. Do you mean coffee?" The woman giggled, her laugh like a string of delicate chimes. "Is that what you call it here?" "Yes, 2 of your most popular varieties, please." Her sister leaned forward, speaking in a conspiratorial tone. "We're new in town and still adjusting to your customs." Mark, still a bit disoriented, nodded. "Welcome to Millbrook. 2 lattes coming right up. Can I get your names for the order?" "I'm Yara," said the one on the left. "And I'm Nyra," added her sister. As Mark prepared their drinks, the twins peppered him with increasingly bizarre questions. "Tell us, Mark," Yara began. "Is it normal to consume these beverages while performing ritualistic dances?" Mark nearly spilled the milk he was steaming. No. Most people just drink them while sitting or walking." Nyra's eyes widened. "Fascinating. And are you always required to wear these coverings on your lower appendages?" "Pants? Yeah, generally." "How restrictive," Yara commented with a knowing nod. "In our homeland, we embrace a more liberated dress code." Mark felt his face flush as he quickly finished their lattes. "Here you go, ladies. That'll be $8.50. The twins exchanged a confused glance. Nyra pulled out a small, shimmering pouch and poured a handful of iridescent pebbles onto the counter. "We are unfamiliar with your currency. Will these suffice?" Mark picked up one of the stones, mesmerized by its glow. "I know, but the first drinks are on the house." "Welcome to Millbrook." Their faces lit up with dazzling smiles. "Your generosity will be noted," Yara said with a gleam in her eye. Nyra quickly elbowed her. "Thank you for your kindness. Perhaps you can assist us with finding lodging as well." Mark hesitated, but something about their strange yet captivating presence made him offer. "Actually, there's an empty apartment in my building. I can show it to you after my shift if you'd like." The twins clapped their hands in unison. "Splendid," they chorused before leaving with their lattes in hand. The rest of Mark's day dragged on, his mind constantly returning to the twins. Their strange questions, otherworldly beauty, and mysterious demeanor had left him unsettled but curious. When 6 p.m. finally arrived, he rushed out of the shop, surprised to find Yara and Nyra waiting for him outside, looking just as ethereal as they had that morning. "Greetings once again, Coffee Alchemist," Yara said, smiling. "We have explored your settlement and noticed an abundance of receptacles for canine waste. Is this standard across all human towns?" Mark chuckled. "Yeah, those are for dog poop. Pretty standard, yeah. The apartment's this way." As they walked, the questions continued. "Mark, we've observed many humans engaging in the pressing of lips. Is this a way to exchange nutrients?" Nyra asked, genuinely curious. Mark nearly tripped over his own feet. "No, that's called kissing. It's a way to show affection." "Interesting," Yara remarked. "And do you perform this ritual with new acquaintances?" Mark's face turned bright red. "Definitely not. Usually, it's reserved for romantic partners." "How does one determine compatibility for such partnerships?" Nyra pressed. Her large eyes locked onto his with an unsettling intensity. Mark fumbled for a response, but thankfully, they had arrived. "This is the building," he muttered, glad for the distraction. He showed them around the vacant apartment, unable to shake the feeling that the twins communicated with each other silently, with glances and gestures. "This dwelling is satisfactory," Yara finally declared. "We shall take it." "Great," Mark said, relieved. "I'll let the landlord know. You can move in as soon as the paperwork is done." As he turned to leave, Nyra gently caught his arm. Her touch sent a strange jolt through him. "We are most grateful for your assistance. Perhaps you could join us for a traditional Earth custom to show our thanks." Mark's heart raced. You mean dinner?" "Precisely. Could you host us for a meal tomorrow evening?" Yara chimed in, suddenly at his other side. "Sure," Mark replied, still flustered. "How about 7 p.m. at my place? Apartment 3B. The twins beamed at him. "Most excellent. We shall see you then." The next day, Mark found himself anxiously preparing for the dinner, checking and rechecking the lasagna in the oven. Just before 7, a sharp knock made him jump. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find the twins standing there, dressed in a bizarre combination of formal wear and beach attire. Yara wore a cocktail dress with flip-flops, while Nyra sported a tuxedo jacket over a bikini top and board shorts. "We have dressed according to Earth customs," Yara proudly announced. Mark stifled a laugh. "Well, you've certainly put in the effort. Come on in." Dinner was, as expected, strange. The twins were baffled by the concept of utensils, opting to eat with their hands until Mark demonstrated how to use a fork. Throughout the meal, their endless questions continued, ranging from human courtship to what qualities humans find attractive in a partner. At one point, Yara asked, "Would you be more attracted to a mate with the ability to alter their molecular structure, or perhaps one with natural bioluminescence?" Mark laughed nervously. "I'd settle for someone who likes bad sci-fi movies." As they finished the meal, Nyra suddenly asked, "May we use your waste extraction facility?" It took Mark a moment to realize she meant the bathroom. "Yeah, down the hall?" The twins left, and Mark leaned against the counter, his head spinning from the strangeness of the evening. His thoughts were interrupted by a series of odd noises from the bathroom: rushing water, mechanical whirring, and what sounded disturbingly like an explosion. "Everything okay in there?" he called out. There was a long pause, and then the door opened. Yara and Nyra emerged, looking perfectly composed. "Your facilities are most invigorating," Yara said with a grin. Before Mark could respond, a loud boom shook the apartment, followed by flickering lights. The twins exchanged a serious look. "I'm afraid we haven't been entirely truthful with you," Nyra said gravely. "Your assistance has been invaluable, but we need your trust now. Your planet may depend on it." Before Mark could process what was happening, a blinding light filled the apartment. Nyra's voice cut through the chaos. "The adventure you've been waiting for, Mark. It's about to begin." Overwhelmed, Mark stumbled toward the bathroom, muttering, "I need a shower." In his daze, he forgot to lock the door. Just as he stepped out of the shower, reaching for a towel, the door swung open, revealing the twins. Their eyes widened as they took in the sight of Mark, completely naked. "Oh my," Yara said, her gaze trailing over him. "Is this a traditional Earth greeting?" Mark yelped, frantically grabbing for the towel. "What are you doing? Get out!" But instead of leaving, the twins stepped further into the bathroom, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something else Mark couldn't quite place. "Fascinating musculature," Nyra remarked, tilting her head. "Do all humans possess such defined abdominal regions? Or are you an exception?" Mark stood frozen, gripping the towel around his waist like a lifeline, heart pounding in his chest. Yara and Nyra were now only a few feet away, their wide, glowing eyes fixed on him with an unnerving mix of curiosity and what could only be described as admiration. "Why you need to leave?" he stammered, his mind still reeling from the bizarre events of the past 24 hours. Nyra stepped closer, her head tilted slightly. "We were unaware that nudity among Earthlings was considered improper in certain situations." "Fascinating social norm," she murmured, as if cataloging his reaction for some unseen research project. "Improper?" Mark's voice was strained. "Yes, definitely improper." He clutched the towel tighter, heat rising to his cheeks. Most people don't just walk in on someone when they're naked. Yara, still studying him with those unnervingly large eyes, smiled faintly. Ah, we apologize for our intrusion. We are still learning your customs. Mark's mind raced. He needed to regain control of this increasingly surreal situation. Okay, he said, swallowing hard, just go back to the living room, and I'll be out in a minute. With synchronized grace, the twins nodded and left the bathroom. The door clicked shut behind them, and Mark exhaled sharply, leaning against the sink. He took a few deep breaths, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. What the hell is going on? He had always joked about wanting more excitement in his life, but this was starting to feel like a fever dream. Two gorgeous women, no, aliens, show up in his quiet little town, rent the apartment next door, crash his dinner. And now this? And what was all that talk about interdimensional leaks and temporal stabilizers he overheard in the bathroom? His head was spinning. Shaking his head in disbelief, Mark quickly dried off, threw on some clothes, and made his way back into the living room. The twins were sitting on his couch, whispering to each other in that strange musical language again. As soon as he entered, they went silent, their bright eyes locking onto him. Mark cleared his throat, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. So, what was all that about? Earlier in the bathroom, I heard you say something about interdimensional leaks. Care to explain? Yara and Nyra exchanged a glance, as if silently debating how much to reveal. Finally, Nyra spoke, her tone suddenly more serious. Mark, we told you earlier that we weren't entirely truthful with you. Mark folded his arms, his curiosity now mingling with a growing sense of dread. Yeah, I remember that part. So, what's the truth? Yara leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on her knees. We are not from your planet, as you've likely guessed by now. Yeah, Mark said, rolling his eyes. That much is clear. You're not exactly blending in with the whole glowing eyes and alien vibe. Nyra smiled faintly. Our appearance was not meant to deceive you, only to adapt. We are from a distant system, far beyond what your species currently understands. We are travelers, explorers, observers, if you will. Observers? Mark asked, his skepticism mounting. Observers of what? Coffee shops? Human dating rituals? Of your world, Yara clarified. We've been sent to study Earth, to understand its people, its customs, its resources. She paused, her expression softening. But our mission has encountered complications. Complications? Mark echoed, feeling the pit in his stomach deepen. What kind of complications? Nyra sighed, running a hand through her shimmering hair. There's no easy way to explain this, Mark. Our ship, it's malfunctioning. We've been stranded here for longer than anticipated. The technology that allows us to remain in sync with our own dimension is breaking down. Stranded? Mark's brows furrowed. Wait, so you're stuck here? And what does that have to do with the interdimensional leak I overheard? Yara stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the dark street below. Our vessel operates across multiple dimensions. When it functions properly, it can slip between these dimensions undetected, allowing us to observe different realities and timelines. But when it fails, it can cause tears. Tears? Mark felt his heart rate spike. Like holes between dimensions? Nyra nodded. Yes, and these tears, if not repaired, could become permanent. Your reality, your world, could be at risk. Mark stared at them, his mind racing to comprehend the magnitude of what they were saying. So, you're telling me there's a rip in space-time, and it's because of you? Not intentionally, Yara said, turning to face him. We didn't mean for this to happen. But now, we need your help. My help? Mark blinked in disbelief. I'm a barista, not a quantum physicist. What can I possibly do? Nyra's expression softened. You've already helped us by offering shelter, by trusting us. And we need that trust now more than ever. There's one thing that could stabilize the tear and allow us to fix our ship, but it requires access to something in your world, something we cannot obtain ourselves. Mark's mind was spinning. Okay, what is it? What do you need? Yara approached him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. There is a facility nearby, one that your government has been using to experiment with advanced technology they do not fully understand. We need to gain access to it. Wait, hold on, Mark said, stepping back. You want me to break into a government facility? That's insane. It's not as dangerous as it sounds, Nyra interjected quickly. We have the means to get in and out undetected. We just need someone with local knowledge to guide us. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small living room. This is crazy. I mean, you're asking me to help you break into some secret lab to fix a problem with dimensions? Yes, Yara said simply. But if we don't, the consequences could be catastrophic for both our worlds. Mark stopped pacing, his mind reeling. He had dreamed of adventure his whole life. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Yet, staring at the two alien women in front of him, he knew one thing for certain. There was no going back to the quiet, uneventful life he had lived before. Taking a deep breath, Mark turned to the twins. All right, I'll help you, but we do this my way. No more surprises. Yara and Nyra exchanged a look, their faces breaking into identical smiles. Agreed, Yara said. Thank you, Mark, Nyra added, her voice soft but sincere. We won't forget this. As the weight of the decision settled over him, Mark felt a strange sense of exhilaration mixed with the fear. He had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear. His life had just taken a turn he never could have predicted. The adventure had begun. The next few days passed in a surreal blur. Mark couldn't quite wrap his head around the fact that he was now part of an interdimensional rescue mission, guided by two alien women with unsettlingly perfect features and even more unsettling plans. Despite the strangeness, he felt a rush of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Life in Millbrook had always been monotonous, until now. Late one evening, Yara and Nyra met him in his apartment to prepare for the mission. The air was thick with tension as the three of them huddled around Mark's small coffee table, the twins explaining the intricacies of their plan. The facility, Yara began, her voice low and serious, is located about 30 miles from here, in a remote area. The government has been conducting experiments with energy sources that they don't fully comprehend. Some of this technology aligns with what we need to stabilize the dimensional tear. Mark stared down at the crude map Nyra had drawn. And you're sure we can get in without setting off alarms or, being shot? Nyra smiled slightly. That is why we have this. She reached into a small satchel and pulled out a sleek, iridescent device that fit snugly in her palm. It's a cloaking mechanism. Once activated, it will bend the light around us, making us invisible to any human sensors. Invisible, Mark repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. Right? Of course. And this thing, it actually works? Yara nodded. It's been tested on several other worlds. There's no reason to believe it won't work here. Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. No reason except the fact that I've never broken into a top-secret government lab with a couple of aliens before. But sure, let's go with that. Nyra leaned in, her voice gentle. We understand this is overwhelming, Mark. But we wouldn't be asking for your help if it weren't absolutely necessary. He met her gaze and saw something in her eyes. Genuine concern. Maybe even a trace of fear. Whatever their true mission was, it was clear that these two women needed him. And strangely enough, that gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. All right, he said, nodding. I'm in. When do we go? Tonight, Yara said firmly. The security at the facility is lowest in the early hours of the morning. We'll leave at midnight. The night was cool and quiet as the trio drove out of town. The only sound the soft hum of the engine and the faint murmur of crickets in the distance. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing. The twins sat in the back seat, whispering to each other in their strange, melodic language. Every now and then, he'd catch a word or two, something about synchronization or spatial coordinates, but most of it was beyond him. As they neared the facility, the tension in the car grew palpable. Mark slowed the vehicle, turning onto a dirt road that led into the dense woods surrounding the lab. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of lights peeking through the trees. There it is, Yara whispered. Park here. We'll proceed on foot. Mark pulled the car to the side of the road, killing the engine. The three of them climbed out, and Nyra immediately activated the cloaking device. A faint shimmer passed over their bodies, and just like that, they vanished from sight. Mark stared down at his hands, or where his hands should have been, and blinked in amazement. "Okay, that's incredible. We must move quickly," Yara said, her voice a quiet whisper beside him. "The cloaking won't last forever." They made their way through the forest, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Despite the gravity of the situation, Mark found himself strangely calm. It was almost as if the reality of what they were doing hadn't fully sunken yet. Soon, they reached the edge of the facility. A tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded the compound, but Nyra had assured him earlier that they had a way through. Sure enough, she pulled out another device, a small, cylindrical object that she pressed against the fence. There was a soft hum, and within seconds, a section of the fence melted away, leaving a gap just large enough for them to slip through. Mark followed the twins, heart pounding as they crept toward the nearest building. The facility was a cluster of low, windowless structures, illuminated by harsh floodlights that cast long, eerie shadows across the compound. From a distance, it looked like any other nondescript government installation, but Mark knew there was much more happening here than met the eye. "Over here," Yara whispered, gesturing toward a side entrance. They reached the door, and Nyra produced yet another device, a small, flat card that she slid into the door's security panel. There was a faint click, and the door swung open silently. Mark glanced at the twins, who nodded in unison, and they slipped inside. The interior of the building was cold and sterile, lit by dim, flickering lights that cast a ghostly glow over the polished floors. Mark could hear the hum of machinery somewhere in the distance, and the faint, mechanical beeping of security systems. "We need to get to the lower levels," Yara whispered, leading them down a long corridor. "That's where they're storing the energy core we need." As they moved deeper into the facility, Mark's nerves began to fray. His pulse quickened, and he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. What if they got caught? What if the cloaking device failed? What if this whole mission was a terrible mistake? Suddenly, Nyra stopped in front of a metal door marked "Restricted Access." She placed her hand on the panel beside the door, and the locks disengaged with a soft hiss. The door slid open, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. "Stay close," Yara said quietly, her voice barely more than a breath. They descended the stairs, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. Mark's mind raced, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. Whatever the twins were after, they were close now. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a massive underground chamber filled with strange, glowing machinery. In the center of the room, suspended in a containment field, was a pulsating orb of light. It radiated an otherworldly energy that made the hairs on Mark's arms stand on end. "That's it," Nyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The core." Mark stared at it, his mouth dry. "Okay, now what?" Yara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the orb. "Now we extract it, and we hope the facility's security doesn't detect us." Nyra moved to a control panel on the far side of the room, her fingers dancing across the controls. Mark watched, his heart in his throat, as the containment field flickered and slowly deactivated. The orb hovered for a moment, then gently floated down into Yara's waiting hands. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility, red lights flashing ominously. Mark's stomach dropped. "We've been detected. We need to move," Nyra shouted, grabbing the core from Yara and shoving it into a protective case. "Now!" Without another word, they bolted back up the stairs, the sound of boots and shouts echoing in the halls behind them. Mark's adrenaline spiked, his legs burning as he pushed himself to run faster. What had he gotten himself into? Bursting out of the building, they sprinted for the fence, the floodlights illuminating their path. Mark's lungs burned, his thoughts a chaotic blur of panic and fear. Just as they reached the fence, a loud crack split the air, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Mark turned, his eyes widening in horror. A massive tear in the sky had opened above the facility, swirling with chaotic energy. It looked like reality itself was unraveling. Yara's voice cut through the chaos. The core's destabilizing. We have to get out of here before the tear expands. Mark didn't need to be told twice. Together, they sprinted toward the car, the ground shaking beneath them. The tear in the sky grew larger, twisting and warping as if threatening to swallow the entire world. Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling as he started the car. They sped off into the night, the facility shrinking into the distance behind them. As the tear finally collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar, Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing. He had no idea what he had just witnessed, but one thing was certain. He had crossed the line, and there was no turning back now. The real adventure had just begun.